My name is Gloria, and I am 58 years old. For 6 months, I had been counting down the days on my kitchen calendar until my visit to my son David in Los Angeles. I spent weeks preparing baking batch after batch of his favorite oatmeal raisin cookies until I got the crispness just right, carefully wrapping a restored photograph of him as a boy with his father in a wooden frame and nurturing cuttings from my prized lavender and rosemary plants in little pots to bring a piece of my Arizona garden to his California home. Our weekly video calls lately felt strained though. David seemed thinner, the circles under his eyes a permanent shade of slate, and his words came slower, as if each one was an effort. His wife Heather was always just over his shoulder, her hand resting on his arm, finishing his sentences with a bright, polished laugh that never quite reached her eyes. I told myself he was just a busy man building a new life, that marriage was an adjustment. But when I finally stood on the manicured walkway of his beautiful silent house that sunny Saturday afternoon, my suitcase of homemade gifts at my feet, the happy anticipation I had carried across the desert curdled into something cold and heavy in my chest. No one answered the door, though I rang the bell 3 times and knocked until my knuckles stung. Through the small window in the garage door, I could see both of their cars, his sensible sedan and her sporty coupe, sitting side by side in the shadowy interior. Every window on the house was shut tight against the warm California sun, the blinds drawn like closed eyelids. Before we go any further into this story, I have a genuine question for you. Where are you listening from today? A quiet little town, or maybe a bustling city apartment? Wherever you are, if you have ever felt that knot of worry for someone you love, a worry that whispers something is not right, even when all the surfaces are smooth, let me know you are here with me. Please take a second to hit that like button and subscribe. Your support means I can keep sharing these true stories from my life, these journeys through the quiet storms we sometimes face. Now let me tell you what happened next in that quiet sun-drenched neighborhood. The neighborhood was unnervingly still. No children laughed in yards, no lawnmowers growled, no music drifted from open windows. It was as if the entire street was holding its breath. I sat on the front step, the warmth of the concrete seeping through my linen slacks, trying to convince myself they had just gone for a walk around the block, that they would come around the corner any minute, hand in hand. I watched a man come out of the house directly across the street. He was about my age, maybe a little older, with a face that looked like it had spent years squinting into difficult truths. He had close-cropped grey hair and moved with a deliberate, slightly stiff gait like an old soldier. A large, sleepy-looking German shepherd mix padded at his side. The man gave me a long, assessing look that swept from my sensible traveling shoes to the worry I knew was plain on my face. Then his expression shifted from casual curiosity to something like alarm. He did not wave or smile. He started walking toward me not with a neighborly amble, but with a direct, purposeful stride that made my heart skip a beat. "You are not one of them, are you?" he said, as he got closer, his voice low and gravelly, barely above a whisper. He stopped a few feet away, his eyes darting toward David's house, before locking back on me. "Who are you?" "I am David's mother," I said, forcing a polite smile that felt brittle on my lips. "Gloria, I am visiting from Phoenix. His name is Frank," he told me, and then he did something that shocked me. He reached out and grabbed my arm just above the elbow. His grip was not cruel, but it was firm, urgent, insistent. "Mrs. Gloria, you need to leave this property right now. Do not go inside. Get in your car and go, before it is too late." I pulled my arm back, startled and offended, my maternal instincts flaring. "What on earth are you talking about? This is my son's home. I am expected." He leaned in close enough for me to smell the faint scent of coffee and pipe tobacco on his flannel shirt. "That house is not right," he said, his voice a harsh whisper. "Your boy and his pretty wife, they are hiding something terrible in there. I was a cop for 27 years in this city. I have seen a lot. I know the smell of a bad situation, and this place reeks of it." He spoke in a rushed, urgent cadence, his eyes constantly scanning the windows of David's house. The drilling sounds at 2 in the morning, not construction noise, but a steady, persistent whine. The chemical smell that comes on the breeze sometimes, like ammonia and rotten fruit. They get these big deliveries from scientific supply companies, boxes marked fragile and biohazard, but you never see new furniture or hear parties. The wife, she is always at the window, especially at night, just watching the street, not enjoying the view, watching. And your son, he looks like a ghost. He gets the mail with his head down, shoulders hunched. He does not even wave anymore. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. This stranger was giving voice and horrifying detail to the secret fears I had been swatting away for months. But the mother in me, the part that had raised a kind and gentle boy, rose up defensively. My David is a good man, I insisted, my own voice trembling. He has a stressful job in tech. He is probably just immersed in a project. Frank's eyes, a pale, weathered blue, held mine with an intensity that brooked no argument. Listen to me. Do not eat or drink anything in that house. Do not believe everything they tell you. He glanced over his shoulder, then pressed a crumpled piece of paper from his pocket into my hand. My number. Call me if anything, and I mean anything, feels off, day or night. At that exact moment, as if summoned by our conspiratorial tones, the front door of David's house swung open with a cheerful artificial creak. Heather stood there, backlit by the cool interior light, her blonde hair cascading in perfect waves, her smile wide and bright as a television commercial. "Mom, you made it? We were just in the back garden," she trilled, her voice like polished glass. We must not have heard the bell. David appeared behind her, a pale silhouette. He offered a weak smile that did not reach his eyes, which looked hollow and bruised. The inside of the house was like a museum exhibit, titled Modern California Living. Everything was impeccably clean and ruthlessly stylish. All cool grays, stark whites, and sharp angles. But it felt sterile, empty of life. There were no books stacked haphazardly on tables, no cozy Afghans thrown over the backs of the severe leather sofas, no photographs on the walls except for a single enormous abstract painting that felt cold and impersonal. It was a stage set, not a home where people lived and loved and made messes. We were finally soundproofing David's little recording studio. "You see," Heather explained seamlessly, linking her arm through mine and guiding me further inside. For his new podcast project on coding languages, it is so important to eliminate ambient noise. We must have had the heavy door closed and just did not hear the bell. Her explanation was smooth, rehearsed. David nodded silently from behind her. He stepped forward and gave me a stiff one-armed hug. He felt bony and fragile under his soft cotton shirt. "You look tired, honey," I said, unable to stop myself. My hands coming up to cup his face. "Are you sleeping?" "Just a big deadline, Mom," he murmured, his eyes skittering away from mine to a point on the floor. "You know how it is." Heather dominated the conversation for the rest of the afternoon, a torrent of words about market analytics, search engine optimization, and the appreciating property values in their zip code. David just nodded along, a silent accessory in his own living room. She pointed out the smart home features, the imported Italian floor tiles, the energy-efficient appliances, with a pride that felt more like a sales pitch than a sharing of her life. When I asked David a direct question about his work, Heather would answer for him, her hand coming to rest on his knee, her fingers pressing just a little too firmly. She made dinner that night, a complicated arugula, an endive salad, with candied walnuts and pomegranate seeds dressed in a tart vinaigrette. I knew David had never liked bitter greens or fruit in his salad. He picked at it, moving the leaves around his plate with his fork. Heather, however, kept my wine glass magically full, a deep red Cabernet that she praised for its notes of blackberry and oak. I remembered Frank's warning, a cold finger tracing my spine, and only pretended to sip, letting the dark liquid barely touch my lips before setting the glass down. That night, lying on the too firm, pull-out couch in the living room, the unfamiliar shadows of their expensive art sculptures looming around me. I heard them, muffled, angry voices from down the hall, behind what I assumed was their bedroom door. Heather's voice sharp as shattered glass, though I could not make out the words. Then David's lower, pleading, desperate, then the distinct final click of a lock turning. Not the gentle turn of a privacy lock, but the solid metallic snick of a deadbolt. I lay awake for hours after that, staring at the pristine ceiling, Frank's words echoing in the silent dark. The smell of a bad situation. The next morning, David looked worse, if that was possible. He found me in the sterile chrome-accented kitchen, trying to figure out their complicated espresso machine. "Mom," he started, his voice cracking on the single syllable. He glanced toward the hallway. "Things are not okay here. I am in..." "Sweetheart, there you are." Heather glided into the room, her silk robe swishing, and wrapped an arm possessively around his shoulders, cutting off his words. "He is just having a bout of work anxiety," she said smoothly, her manicured fingers digging into the fabric of his shirt. "The project is intense. I have it under control. A little mindfulness, some supplements." David flinched almost imperceptibly and fell silent, his gaze dropping to the spotless quartz countertop. The moment was severed, and the bright artificial atmosphere snapped back into place. Later, while Heather was on a long animated phone call in the other room, I wandered the hallway, pretending to admire the architecture. I noticed a door I had not seen before tucked in an alcove at the end of the hall near the garage entrance. It was a solid core door, painted the same grey as the walls, making it nearly invisible. And it had a new gleaming silver keypad lock installed on it. A serious lock, the kind you would see on a utility room or a private office. Around the edges of the lock, fresh silvery scratch marks marred the paint like someone had tried to force it with a tool. I tried to get David alone for the rest of the day, but Heather was a constant smiling shadow. She suggested a drive up the coast to Malibu, but I pleaded a headache from the travel. When I was finally by myself in the guest bathroom, the fan whirring for cover, I called my best friend Lucy back in Phoenix. "Lucy, something is very wrong," I whispered into the phone, my voice trembling. "It is David." I told her everything. The empty, too quiet house, Frank's frantic warning. The locked door that felt like a secret. The controlled meals, the way David seemed to shrink in Heather's presence. "Gloria, listen to me," Lucy said, her voice tight with a fear that mirrored my own. "Get out, do not spend another night. Get in your car and come home. Now, this is not normal new wife behavior. This is something else." "But what if he is in real danger?" I whispered back, tears pricking my eyes. "What if she has done something to him? I cannot just leave him here." After I hung up, my hands were ice cold. A new resolve, hard and clear, settled in my gut. I had to know. I waited until David went to take a shower. I heard the water start. I saw his phone sitting on the kitchen counter next to a bowl of perfect uneaten fruit. I picked it up. The screen lit up asking for a 6-digit passcode, but the notification banner at the top was visible. It was an email from the HR department at Synapse Systems, his old tech company. The subject line read, "Final notice regarding unexcused extended leave and termination of benefits." My blood seemed to freeze in my veins. He had not just been busy. He had not been working at all. He had been on leave, unexcused leave. For how long the happy facade of the successful young professional in Los Angeles crumbled to dust in my hand. I managed to corner David in the small, barren backyard after a tense lunch. Heather had gone to a specialty grocery store, a trip she insisted on making alone. The yard was just as staged as the inside. A patch of perfect grass, 2 minimalist concrete planters with sculptural succulents, no comfortable chairs. "David, look at me," I said, my voice gentle but firm, the voice I used when he was a boy and had done something he was afraid to tell me. "I saw an email on your phone from Synapse. It said something about termination. What is going on, sweetheart?" He stared at the geometric lines of the patio stones, his shoulders slumping, as if under a physical weight. "It is complicated, Mom," he mumbled. "A lot of restructuring. And the locked door in the hall. The one with the new keypad. What is in the basement, David?" At the mention of the basement, his head jerked up. His face went from pale to ashen. He started to shake a fine tremor that began in his hands and traveled up his arms. His breath came in short, shallow gasps. Heather, she made me quit. He blurted out the words, tumbling over each other. Months ago, she controls everything. The money, the phones, who I can talk to. She monitors everything. She says she is protecting me, that I am not stable, that the world is too much for me. Protecting you from what? I asked, taking a step closer, my own hands beginning to tremble. David, what does she think she is protecting you from? From what I did, he whispered, the sound barely escaping his lips. Tears welled in his red-rimmed eyes and spilled over, tracing clean paths down his cheeks. To Dad. The world tilted. The sunny backyard, the blue sky, it all swam for a moment. My Robert, my sweet, steady Robert, died of a sudden massive heart attack 5 years ago while gardening. It was a tragedy, a shock, but it was natural. What are you talking about? Heather said it was not a heart attack. David choked out, his body folding in on itself. She said it was my fault, that I was careless, and she has proof. She made me help her, fix it. The sound of the garage door opener grinding to life cut through the air like a chainsaw. David's head snapped up, pure, unadulterated terror contorting his features. He gripped my arms, his fingers like vice clamps. Mom, please, do not ask anymore. Do not say anything. You have to leave. Today. Just get in your car and go. Just pretend you do not know. Please. Heather came in through the kitchen door, her arms laden with reusable bags from an expensive market. Her smile was already painted on, bright and inquiring. David wiped his face on his sleeve and turned away, busying himself with the succulents, as if checking for pests. I knew then, with a certainty that was both terrifying and solid, that I would not be leaving. Not without my son. The mystery of the locked door was no longer a curiosity. It was the horrifying epicenter of everything, and I had to see it. That night, the house was a tomb of silence again. I waited, each tick of the clock on the bedside table, a hammer blow to my nerves. When the digital numbers read 2:17, I pushed back the crisp guest sheets. I put on my robe and crept into the hallway, my bare feet silent on the cool wooden floor. The keypad on the basement door glowed in the dark hallway with a soft, malevolent green light. My heart was pounding so loudly I was sure it would wake them. I tried David's birthday. The keypad emitted a low negative buzz. Access denied. I tried Robert's birthday, my fingers clumsy. Another buzz. Access denied. My fingers hovered over the numbers. A desperate, wild thought entered my head. I typed in my own birthday. A single soft affirmative beep. A solid mechanical click echoed in the silent hall. The door was unlocked. I pushed it open slowly. A wave of air washed over me, shockingly cold compared to the climate-controlled upstairs, and laced with a nauseating cocktail of smells, sharp, antiseptic like a hospital corridor, undercut by a cloying sweet odor that reminded me of overripe peaches and rubbing alcohol. I fumbled along the wall inside the door, my fingers finding a light switch. A bank of harsh fluorescent lights flickered and hummed to life overhead, revealing a scene that made my legs buckle. I grabbed the doorframe to stay upright. It was a makeshift laboratory, arranged with a terrifying obsessive neatness. Stainless steel rolling tables held an array of beakers, glass tubes, and microscopes. A small industrial refrigerator hummed loudly in the corner. Shelving units were lined with neatly labeled chemical bottles and boxes of latex gloves. Against the far concrete wall were 2 heavy-duty filing cabinets. A deep primal dread propelled me forward. I pulled open the top drawer of the nearest cabinet. It was filled with hanging medical files organized alphabetically. I pulled one out at random. It was Robert's. Robert Michael Walsh. I saw his full medical history, copies of EKG reports, and on top the stark clinical language of a coroner's report. My vision blurred. I opened another file, more of Robert's records, and another. On a lower shelf were a series of black hardcover notebooks. I opened one. It was filled with Heather's frantic looping handwriting pages and pages of it, interspersed with chemical diagrams and printed articles about neurology. Phrases leaped out at me, circled and underlined. Cellular regeneration via synthetic peptides, halting and reversing neuronal decay, metabolic catalysts for tissue repair. It was the notebook of a mad scientist. On a computer monitor set up on a separate desk, a video player window was paused. The scene was dark, grainy. With a trembling hand that felt disconnected from my body, I moved the mouse. The video filled the screen, and a silent scream tore through my mind. It showed a bedroom, my bedroom. In our old house in Phoenix, David was in the frame, his face a grotesque mask of anguish and fear, lit by the dim lamp on the nightstand. He was holding a syringe. He was leaning over a figure in the bed. It was Robert, my Robert, pale, gaunt, and utterly still in the final stages of his illness. David, his hand shaking violently, was injecting something into the IV line taped to his father's frail arm. A soundless, breathless shriek clogged my throat. I staggered back, bile rising. This was not just control, not just manipulation. This was profound, terrifying madness. Heather had not just crafted a delusion. She had constructed an entire alternate reality, a horrific redemption project. And she had enslaved my son with a manufactured cinematic guilt. This video, this staged monstrous thing, was her leverage. This was the terrible secret festering in the heart of this beautiful, empty house. Just then, a floorboard creaked on the stairs behind me. The softest sigh of a foot on wood. I turned, my heart seizing in my chest. Heather stood at the foot of the stairs. She was wearing a simple white cotton nightgown, and in her hand was a long, sharp syringe, its barrel filled with a viscous amber liquid. Her pretty face, usually so animated, was serene, almost blank, empty of all the false warmth and practiced charm. Her eyes were dark, depthless pools. "Mrs. Gloria," she said, her voice flat, devoid of inflection, as if she were commenting on the weather. "You were not supposed to be down here. This is a controlled environment. Now you are part of the experiment too." Time seemed to slow, thickening, like cold syrup. The hum of the refrigerator was deafening. My mind, which had been reeling in horror, suddenly clicked into a sharp, desperate focus. I had to keep her talking. I had to buy time, distract her, find a weakness. I thought of Frank, hopefully already calling the police. I thought of David asleep or trapped upstairs. I channeled the calm, steady tone I had used for decades with panicked students in the library. "Heather," I said, my voice surprisingly even. "This is all too much for you. This project, the responsibility. Let me help you. You are exhausted. You need to rest." Her head tilted slightly like a bird considering a strange insect. My words seemed to confuse her, to not compute with the script in her head. Her eyes flickered for a second, a crack in the placid mask revealing a glimpse of profound fatigue and something like childlike confusion. Then just as quickly, they hardened back into that flat, focused emptiness. The crack sealed shut. "We are on the verge of a breakthrough," she stated, taking a step forward onto the concrete floor. "The initial trials had contamination. David introduced variables. He is too emotional. But the genetic material from a direct maternal relative, especially one with your phenotypic resilience, it is the final stabilizing variable. We need you. Your compliance will help him too. It will complete his atonement." She took another step, the syringe held loosely, but purposefully at her side. David appeared on the stairs behind her, barefoot in his pajamas. His face was the color of parchment, his eyes wide with a terror so complete it was paralyzing. David locked the door. Heather commanded without even glancing back, her gaze fixed on me. "Keep your mother here. We cannot have interruptions now." David hesitated, his body trembling. He looked at me, his eyes begging for forgiveness for what he was about to do. In that split second of his hesitation, every instinct I possessed screamed at me to act. I did not think. I swung my arm up in a wide, desperate arc, knocking the syringe from Heather's hand. It flew through the air, hitting the edge of a steel table with a sharp tink, before clattering and spinning across the concrete floor into a dark corner. Heather let out a gasp of surprise, more offense than pain. I did not wait. I shoved past her, my shoulder connecting hard with hers, and took the stairs two at a time, my robe flapping around my legs. David reached for me as I passed, a half-hearted, agonized gesture. But I pushed against his chest with all the strength of a mother fighting for her child's soul. He stumbled back against the rough cinder block wall with a grunt. I burst into the hallway and ran for the front door, my breath sobbing in my lungs. I twisted the knob. It turned, but the door did not budge. It was locked, dead-bolted from the inside. She had planned for this contingency. I fumbled with the locks, my fingers slippery with sweat, but they were the kind that needed a key from the inside too. Panic threatened to swallow me whole. I ran to the bedroom I was using and slammed the door shut, locking the simple interior button lock. It was flimsy, useless. I dragged the heavy wooden desk chair over and wedged it under the doorknob. My hands shook so violently I could barely retrieve the crumpled piece of paper from my robe pocket. I dialed Frank's number on my cell phone, pressing it to my ear. "Frank it is, Gloria!" I hissed into the phone, my voice a raw scrape. "You were right. Call the police. Now. The basement. She has a syringe. And David, he is in danger too. We are at the house." Frank's response was immediate, steady, and infused with a calm authority that was like a lifeline. "Barricade the door. Do not open it for anyone but me or a uniform. 5 minutes. Stay on the line if you can." I could hear Heather coming down the hall. Her footsteps were slow, deliberate, a soft padding on the hardwood. She stopped outside my door, a soft, almost polite knock. Tap, 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 tap. "Mrs. Gloria? Come out, we need to talk. David needs you. He is not well. He needs both of us now." Her voice was soothing, reasonable, and it was that practiced normalcy that was more terrifying than any scream. I needed to distract her, to keep her from trying to break down the door immediately. I shouted through the wood, my voice shaking with a deliberate, accusatory heat I did not have to feign. "Heather, I saw the video. I know what you did to Robert. I know what you made David do." Silence from the other side of the door. A thick, heavy silence. Then her voice came back, but the gentle mask was gone. It was charged now with a fanatical, zealous energy. "You saw. Then you see the corruption, you see the failure. David botched the procedure. He contaminated the serum with his weakness, his grief. But I have purified it. I have isolated the catalysts. I can complete his work. I can fix what he broke. I can give him back his father." She began a rambling, increasingly technical and incoherent monologue about synaptic pathways, degraded protein chains, and mitochondrial revival. I stopped listening, letting her voice wash over me as a meaningless buzz. I looked around the room for a weapon, anything. My eyes landed on a heavy brass table lamp with a solid marble base. I unplugged it and hefted it in my hands. It was satisfyingly heavy. I stood with my back against the wall next to the door, the lamp held ready, breathing shallow, ragged prayers. Frank's steady breathing was still faintly audible from the phone on the floor. And then, cutting through the night, like a promise, came the distant rising and falling wail of sirens. They were still blocks away, but they were coming. The sirens grew louder, weaving their way through the grid of sleeping streets, a discordant symphony of impending resolution. Heather's ranting stopped, mid-sentence cut off, as if by a switch. "You ruined everything," she screamed, her voice suddenly raw, ragged with a fury that was pure and undiluted. "All of it, years of work." The door shuddered under a tremendous blow. A heavy thud against the wood, followed by the sound of splintering. Then another. The chair I had wedged under the knob screeched against the floor. The wood around the lock started to splinter inward. On the third blow, the door flew open, the chair skidding across the floor. It was David, his eyes wild and unfocused, holding a small red fire extinguisher like a battering ram. He must have found it, or perhaps Heather had broken the lock, and he had finished the job in his confused state. Heather surged into the room right behind him, a pair of long, sharp-pointed laboratory scissors in her hand. The kind used for dissection. She did not hesitate. She lunged at me, a white-clad fury. I swung the lamp with all my strength. It connected with her forearm with a sickening dense thud. She shrieked a sound of pure pain and rage, and the scissors clattered to the floor. But the blow did not stop her momentum. She crashed into me, her hands scrabbling for my robe, my throat, her breath hot and sour in my face. David. I screamed, not a scream of fear for myself, but a commanding primal cry that came from the deepest, oldest part of me, the part that had sung him to sleep and kissed his scraped knees. David, you are my son. Look at me. Wake up. That shout, his name and his truth, wielded like a hammer, seemed to shatter an invisible glass wall around him. The vacant terror in his eyes cleared for a fraction of a second, replaced by a dawning, horrified recognition. He dropped the fire extinguisher with a crash and launched himself at Heather, wrapping his arms around her from behind in a bear hug, pinning her arms to her sides. They fell to the floor in a tangle of limbs and white fabric, Heather kicking and thrashing like a landed fish. At that moment, Frank and two uniformed Los Angeles police officers charged into the room. They were quick, efficient, and strong. They pulled Heather away from David, who rolled aside gasping. They pinned her, cuffing her hands behind her back as she kicked and spat, her screams devolving into a stream of incoherent jargon about catalytic bonds and legacy sequences. Frank helped David to his feet. David was sobbing great, heaving, body-racking sobs of relief, horror, shame, and exhaustion. He could not stand on his own. Frank had to hold him up. I dropped the lamp and ran to him, and we held each other, clinging like survivors of a shipwreck, both of us shaking uncontrollably. "I'm so sorry, Mom," he kept repeating into my shoulder, his voice broken. I am so sorry. I did not know how to stop it." Frank put a steadying hand on my back, his touch grounding. "You are one brave mother," he said quietly, his own voice thick with emotion. "You did good." The police officers led a still struggling, ranting Heather out of the house and into a waiting squad car. The flashing red and blue lights painted the quiet street in surreal, pulsating strokes. Another officer went down to the basement, his hand on his service weapon. A sergeant, a calm-faced man with a name tag that read Alvarez, took our initial statements right there in the shattered bedroom amidst the splintered door and the overturned chair. He spoke in low, measured tones, explaining that Heather would be taken to a secure facility for a psychiatric evaluation, that the house was now a crime scene, and that we would need to give full formal statements at the station later. The reality of it, the official language, made the nightmare feel both more real and somehow contained. In the stark, unforgiving fluorescent light of the police station's family interview room, and in the slow, painful days and weeks that followed, the full, devastating architecture of the horror was revealed. David, with the patient guidance of a gentle victim's advocate and the gradual return of his own fractured voice, pieced the story together. Heather's control had begun not with a bang, but with 1,000 paper cuts of criticism and isolation after their whirlwind wedding. Old friends were deemed bad influences. Calls from me were stressful interruptions. Then came the focus on his health, his stress levels. She started managing his diet, his supplements. The real turning point, the lever she used to pry him completely from reality, was my husband Robert's final steep decline. David had flown to Phoenix often to help me care for him. In one moment of sheer exhaustion and grief, during a long night vigil, David had accidentally knocked over a bottle of Robert's potent diuretic medication, spilling the pills. Robert had passed away peacefully in his sleep from congestive heart failure. A few days later, a long-expected end to a long illness. But Heather, who had been growing increasingly distant and strange, seized on that moment of human fallibility. She spent months warping it, twisting it in private conversations. She used her knowledge of marketing and narrative to craft a new story. She told David his carelessness had altered his father's medication balance, hastening his death. She said she had found evidence in his medical data. To cement the lie to make the guilt inescapable, she fabricated the video. She used old home footage, graphic editing software she knew from work, and during a visit to our empty house after the funeral, she made David under threat of exposing his crime reenact, injecting a harmless saline solution into his already deceased father's IV port. For the record, she said, to face what you did. That video became the chains. She promised him a path to redemption. Through her research, a way to undo his supposed mistake to literally reverse death. She sold his car, drained their joint savings and his retirement accounts to fund the basement laboratory, ordering equipment and chemicals online. She forced him to quit his job to be her full-time research assistant, cutting him off from the last vestiges of the outside world. The basement was not just a lab, it was her temple, and David was both her prisoner and her unwilling acolyte. David was not a co-conspirator. He was a profound victim held captive, not by physical locks alone, but by a grief and a guilt that had been surgically implanted and meticulously nurtured by someone he had vowed to love and trust. The man I saw was not my son making choices. He was my son being erased. I brought David home to Phoenix. The first weeks in my familiar sun-filled house were a living nightmare of a different kind. The trauma was in the open now, but it was a gaping wound. He had panic attacks that stole his breath in the middle of the night. He jumped at the sound of the mail slot closing. He could not look me in the eye, crushed beneath a mountain of shame that was never, ever his to carry. I did not push. I made his favorite childhood foods, meatloaf with mashed potatoes, chocolate chip pancakes. I sat with him in silence on the porch swing, watching the hummingbirds. I told him I loved him over and over and over, a verbal balm for wounds words could not directly reach. I found a wonderful specialized trauma therapist for him, a kind older man named Dr. Evans. I myself joined a support group for families dealing with severe mental illness. Not to forgive Heather, but to understand the monstrous illness that had hijacked her and to heal my own invisible wounds. The terror, the guilt for not seeing it sooner, the anger. I talked to Lucy for hours on the phone, replaying events, trying to make sense of the senseless. Saying the words out loud, sharing the burden took some of their crushing power away. Frank called every Sunday evening like clockwork. He never asked for gory details. He just asked, "How are you both holding up today?" His friendship was a simple, solid, uncomplicated thing in the midst of the wreckage. A tether to a world where people said what they meant, and a locked door usually just meant you did not have the key. It has been 6 months now. The searing Arizona summer has mellowed into a gentle fall. The seasons have changed in my garden. The lavender I brought back from Los Angeles, battered but alive, has taken root and even bloomed. David still sees Dr. Evans twice a week, but the hollows under his eyes have filled in. He started doing remote contract work for a former colleague's small coding projects to rebuild his confidence. Most mornings we have our coffee together on the back patio, often without speaking, just listening to the birds. We are slowly, painstakingly rebuilding the old rose trellis that Robert built for me decades ago, piece by piece, sanding the old wood and cutting the new. It is slow work. It requires patience. I learned something through this fire, something that scorched away all my old assumptions. Love is not blind faith. It is not ignoring the whispers of your gut to keep a false peace. True love, the fierce and durable kind, is sometimes the courage to see a painful truth, even when that truth is about the child you adore or the person they chose to share their life with. It is the strength to ask the hard questions when something feels off in the pit of your stomach, even when everyone around you, even the person you are worried about, insists that everything is just fine. The most dangerous darkness does not always come from a stranger in a shadowy alley. It can live behind a familiar, well-painted door, speaking in a loving voice, wearing the flawless mask of normalcy. And the greatest strength we possess is not the power to control others or situations, but the power to speak up, to reach a hand into the dark for someone you love, even when they are so lost they are afraid they will pull you down with them, even when they are begging you to look away. David and I do not talk about Heather with hatred anymore. The rage has burned down to ashes. We speak of her now with a sad, weary pity, as one speaks of a devastating natural disaster, a tornado, a wildfire. It was a catastrophic force that swept through our lives. Our energy now is for what we can grow from the scorched earth, not for endlessly cataloguing the destruction. Frank visited last month. He drove the 6 hours from Los Angeles. He brought a young potted agave plant for the garden, saying it was tough and drought resistant. We drank iced tea on the porch in the late afternoon sun, talking about baseball, his dog Duke's arthritis, and the best way to grow tomatoes. We did not talk about the past. We did not need to. His presence was its own quiet testament. I still look west sometimes toward the hazy line of the horizon that leads to Los Angeles, not with fear or anger, but with a strange hard-won gratitude. Because in the heart of my worst nightmare, in that beautiful, terrible house, I found my son again. I found him buried under layers of guilt and fear, and I pulled him back into the light. And we learned together that no wound, no matter how deep or how foul, is beyond the beginning of healing, if you tend to it with relentless truth and unconditional love. Healing is not a straight line. It is a garden you tend every day, pulling weeds of doubt, watering seeds of hope, and learning to appreciate the new growth, however small. Now, I would love to hear from you. Have you ever had a moment where a quiet feeling, a gut instinct whispered that something was wrong in a situation everyone else said was perfect? How did you find the courage to listen to that inner voice, and what happened when you did? Please share your experiences and thoughts in the comments below. Your stories help us all feel less alone. If this story touched you or reminded you of your own hidden strength, please give this video a like. It helps more people find these real, raw conversations about life's difficult journeys. Subscribe to the channel for more stories about resilience, healing, and the quiet, extraordinary bravery of ordinary people. And if you know someone who might need to hear this today, someone who might be ignoring their own gut feeling, please share it with them. Sometimes sharing a story is the first step in helping someone find their voice. Thank you for listening, for being part of this compassionate community, and for remembering that even after the longest, darkest night, the sun still rises. Be kind to yourselves and to each other.